So I'd like to formally welcome all of you to this first breakout session in the lead up to the masterclass on June 30th on the future of the MBA. It's wonderful to see all of you, familiar faces from the Founding Fuel community. This is the first time that we're doing a breakout session of this kind and not relying on just one masterclass, which is usually about 90 minutes to about 120 minutes. We felt that the whole theme that we're going to explore is complex enough and it has many different dimensions, multidimensional. So it's best to try and kind of use smaller breakout sessions like this to unpack the themes and try and kind of then take it to the main masterclass. So we've got one this evening, which is going to be chaired by Baba Prasad with Mr. Myra, with Ms. Kiran Kanek, Sanjay Bhattacharya, and Azunda. Kind of introduce to you Meeta and Gupta, who's going to be moderating the session on the 30th, the plenary session on the 30th. Meeta, over to you.
Thank you so much, IG. And it's incredible to be in such wonderful company. I hope to learn a lot in the next few minutes. I'll just take a minute to quickly talk through the plan for the discussion on the 30th and how this discussion actually drives the key main discussion. The one on the 30th probably is not going to be a closed group discussion, which means it'll be more performative, and that's so we will say things that need to be said or things that could be driven. Here we can be much more direct and honest and whichever way as Baba Prasad wants to run this. The session on the 30th runs more like a traditional session where we introduce the panel, we ask them questions to warm up the audience and to warm up the group. And then we invite both the breakout session representatives to actually ask a couple of very meaningful questions. So the meat of the main discussion gets led by what is discussed over here or what emerges over here. And then, of course, we take it back to the plenary and hopefully manage to ask a sort of aha question that gives the audience both a reason to carry on thinking about it long after the session is over, and also a reason to actually implement the changes that we have suggested in their own institutions. And hopefully we'll be able to hear about those changes in the news in the weeks, months, and years to come. So from my point of view, I think what we're trying to achieve here is drive real change in institutions. And therefore, I'm personally not afraid of being slightly provocative as well. It doesn't hurt IG and Founding Fuel that provocative discussions get more engagement also. So I think we can work towards that. As far as today's discussion is concerned, I am hoping and waiting to hear both the emergent issues as you have already laid out in your email, Baba. And also, I'm really looking forward to the evolution of the discussion as you engage with each other. So I go on to listening mode now and learning mode, which is my favorite mode of being. And hopefully we'll be able to watch something that, a theme evolve over here, a theme that we can take to the larger group to be able to influence the future of the MBA. So thank you. I can put myself on mute now.
Thank you. Over to you, Prasad. The floor is yours. And
thank you. Thank you so much. And it's both a pleasure and an honor to be assigned chair of this board. And I always view chair as being important in its sound, but really a position of humility because, I see chairs as being the conduit between the general public, which has a lot of intelligent questions, and a board of experts on the other side. And so I will not talk too much, but listen to you, stalwarts of the Indian education sphere and also Indian business, to put together, some questions about what we should be doing in terms of the MBA programs in particular, but generally in terms of education in India. As I said, there are two big things that we need to be thinking about. What has led us to this state of questioning the MBA? Okay, so why are we in this question? Why are we raising these questions now? I have always argued, in fact, in my book, Nimble, I laid out why companies don't seem to be prepared so much for change. And, singing like the Simon Garfunkel song, the more changes upon changes, we are more or less the same, right? So we continue with our old thing, thinking about, these changes or these events being flashes in the pan. And so we get over it and then we go back to our old habits. So the question here for us, first thing would be to think about why we're in this situation. What has changed suddenly, or what has happened suddenly that is leading us to think and question about how we change business itself, because that's where the driver is for the MBA programs to change. So is there a way of management that we need to be changing? Is there a kind of business mindset that we need to be changing? What kinds of things are happening, especially in the Indian industry? So I'll leave that question on the table, and we'll go after we discuss through our after we voice our opinions and we discuss this question. We'll go on to what needs to be done in terms of changing the MBA. So the why and the what, if you will, of why we're in this this discussion of changing the MBA program. So I would like to go through each of us, expressing. I would say let's start with Sanjay, because he's at the forefront of where things are changing in terms of finances. He's always been leading things in terms of the credit ratings. It's been starting whole new stuff that was not existent. So let's start with Sanjay, go on, and I'll call on the others as we go along.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prasad. It's very kind of you. And I actually have, I'd like to use your initial comments, your opening comments, to sort of take this forward. I think one of the things we've got to ask ourselves is, what is the purpose of business? Because in a sense, that will define what people who are educating future managers need to do, because the two need to dovetail into each other. And there are a large number of things. I think there's a new understanding in business around the world. The old construct was that businesses exist for the purpose of maximizing shareholder value. That idea increasingly has come under threat. And now I think more and more people are beginning to say that there are a number of groups, all of which are very important and which need to be sort of addressed in the way which need to be benefited and which can gain from the manner in which a business grows and evolves. So you obviously have people like the employees, you have customers, you have, other stakeholders in the business, apart from suppliers, apart from shareholders, providers of capital. And while, there's a huge amount of resistance to this idea, people haven't come to accept it, but it's being widely debated. Now, I think the essence of this really therefore leads to the question, do we need a new form of leadership? Are the old ways in which we looked at business leadership, are those models still relevant? And is leadership of the kind that we need to gradually move to a broader definition of the purpose of business, is that in place? And what does it take? What are the key differences between the models of leadership that certainly, I was taught in business school, and what people now believe is very important? For instance, teamwork, and how, the role of the leader really is to engage a group of people rather than take charge, which was perhaps the widely prevalent notion of leadership in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I think the second thing which is becoming very important is that the leader, in a sense, is really a person who is more of a facilitator and a person who brings together important groups of people so that each person is able to contribute, or each group within the organization or business is able to contribute to the maximum extent. And I think in academia, unfortunately, to a significant extent, the way in, first of all, I don't think leadership is really something that they touch upon extensively during the MBA curriculum. At least it wasn't some years ago. I don't know whether it's changed in the last 5 or 10 years. That's not, I'm out of date with that. But I think it's very important to see whether it's possible to address in a classroom context what we need to think about in terms of leadership. And lots of people have done it in the United States. I mean, people like Warren Bennis, people like Abraham Zalesnik, there are enough people, John Cotter, enough guys in different business schools have come at this, and they've reached obviously different conclusions in some regards. That's one. I think the second thing is, the idea that graduating MBAs have in terms of their understanding of what is their role in a company, their role in business. And I think too many people now are not looking at the business in a holistic manner. They don't see themselves sort of viewing this as a home where they're a member of a family and they can contribute. I think the idea has changed significantly. You can see this manifest itself in different ways, where the tenure of a job for many people who join organizations is pretty short, especially with MBAs, as opposed to other groups of people who join companies, like chartered accountants or engineers or, various different people. And one of the reasons for that is the expectations that they have from their employer. And I think there's a mismatch even there between the expectations that employers have and what they would like to bring to the table. Because I think quite often, and certainly in industries like finance and even consulting and some other businesses which are more service oriented, the expectation is that they bring specialist skill sets. So you're an options trader, or you're an algorithms, whatever, or you are a person who has deep knowledge of, let's say, skills in supply chain, in consulting, or your skills in marketing, or whatever. And on the flip side, I don't think that many of the MBAs are actually well prepared to just become, or want to become, just specialists and see themselves limited to a sort of the role of a guy who's important but an outsider looking in. And that's part of the problem. The third is, I think, this is a very tricky one, and it's been tried, I think, somewhat unsuccessfully. And again, it reflects the change in our sort of, the change in time, in the way business has evolved. I think is the values that we have as individuals and what those values come to represent in the context of working for a business, whether it's large or small, and what can business education do to sort of at least put together some kind of a template which says we need to be aware that these values really matter in running a business. I remember when I was at IIM, Professor Ravi Mathai used to address us on the first day that we all joined the institute, and he said, 170 of you will join this program and you learn a lot of things. You'll be exposed to a lot of very intelligent and high quality, teachers, and please listen to them carefully and take away the maximum. But remember, the important thing is when you leave and you represent IIMA, people say that he is a manager who came from that you can hold your head high in terms of the manner in which you conduct yourself. I don't think that idea pervades people's thinking anymore. And to my mind, it's very important that it does. Because only then, in many ways, it's interrelated with the idea of leadership as well. If you have a belief in a set of values which are intrinsic both to you as an individual and which can be mapped onto how a business functions, I think it's very important. It makes a huge difference. I'd say primarily, I think it's about change in terms of behavioral, facilitating behavioral change. I'm not very focused on the academic or the curriculum change, which I think there are some areas there which need to change as well. I mean, people are still teaching CAPM and arbitrage pricing theory and rubbish of that nature, or even, theory X and theory Y when they teach human resource management. But that's okay. I mean, that's not important because I think that causes restriction. But I think the behavioral and the leadership issues associated with management education really make a difference to how you fit into business and how you can contribute and what in turn employers expect from you and the alignment or fit with that. So I think that's really where I come from.
Very good, Sanjay. Lots of stuff to think about, and I'll put that aside for our general discussion. But I like, as I said, to get our all our panelists with their thoughts on board. So can I go to Kiran next and ask, basically because you come from, you've been chair of NASCOM, etc. But technology, as I've seen, has been one of the, we all know, that's one of the key drivers of change in whatever industry you are. And of course, the IT transformed the Indian landscape in the 90s. And when I was in IISc Bangalore, it just started booming and, it went on to become a whole world-changing phenomenon. So I'd like to see from you what you think about, the drivers of change. Why are we in this position where we are talking about changing the MBA structure?
Thank you, Prasad. I want to take the first question, which is the why part, as you said, and look at the context. And, earlier when you introduced the subject, you talked of a sudden change, if I recall. And to me, it seems that the change is not sudden. In fact, it's been slow and insidious, and that's more dangerous, but it's accelerating. One good example is what you just mentioned, technology. It's not something that's come overnight. For example, everybody talks of digitization today. It's not something that's happened suddenly. It's been slow. There have been a lot of other changes in the context which have been slow, and I want to touch on them. I just want to start, though, with mentioning one sudden change. And that sudden change, to me, is caused by the pandemic. Just as, after 9/11 in the US, there were other terrorist attacks elsewhere, but they didn't have the same resonance around the world as the US one. Suddenly, everything changed in the way we lived, what we did, how we did. Even companies, and I remember this from different companies that I worked at in that period, suddenly everybody became aware of the fact that, how do we take precautions against this? First, of course, safety of our own people and our offices and our stakeholders, but also in terms of business, what does it mean? Today, I see the same thing. If there is a sudden change, it is in the understanding of how health can be as critical a factor that affects business. And again, like security, even your own people, as much as anything else. Overnight, and in India, of course, we had an extreme form of it, a 2-month plus complete lockdown. We just shut down everything completely. Nothing would move. And to me, it seems that business has, beginning to absorb that. It said early, they don't know how to react. But the one thing, therefore, that stands out in terms of change of context is the need for resilience, that your business and your organization must be resilient. So, in the IT industry, we talk all the time of business continuity and, disaster recovery centers and so on, which was particular because we were doing a 24/7 online continuous sort of work. Now it's become common. I speak to companies around in different sectors, and they're all talking of resilience and the need to be able to recover very, very fast and get back irrespective of what. So to me, this is one very key change. Other changes which have been slow and which affect what we do, particularly in terms of what an MBA would have to deal with, is the big change in employment. It's slow, but as I said, it's building up. More experts are required, more expertise is required, but very often it's for short periods. And so this whole idea of the gig economy, not so much just for the aggregators like, an Uber or for an Amazon which does deliveries, but also for organizations which need experts for a particular period and then may or may not need them later. Or they're trying out something new and they want to get some people on board to see does this work or not, to pilot something. And they're not sure. If it works, they might hire them. If not, they want to get rid of them. And so this whole concept of what are now popularly called independent contractors or gigging is taking center stage. And that's a big change in terms of how you manage your staff, because you no longer have a full-time staff. As Sanjoy said, the change started earlier with the change from being career-minded. You join a company, you're there for life. And in India in particular, this has been strong because the ultimate was to get government employment, which basically meant employment for life. You start your career when you're 22 and you retire at 58 or 60 or 65 in that very same company. Now it's changed completely, particularly for MBAs, most of all, but a little bit for others too. And people are looking at shorter time spans, which means organizations have to deal with that. The third change, which has again been slow, is a greater societal consciousness. Consumers have been somewhat slower in India, but like elsewhere, they become very conscious of which company does what kind of product in what manner. First, of course, is it safe? Then there are people with particular things like organic foods, organically done. Then the people who look at how is this company in terms of how they deal with the customer. And last and increasingly, but yet small, is the concept of how do they deal with their own employees and staff. The thing that started long back in the US with, the outsourcing to countries and saying, is this sweat labor, and, reacting to that. It's just beginning here, but I think that's a trend that's catching on. The final big one I want to touch on, and I want to keep this brief, is the transition, again over a period of time, not slow, towards non-business management. Earlier, NGOs, so-called, as we call them in India, or voluntary organizations, were truly voluntary organizations. They were volunteers who didn't bother about career or money. There were a few idealists who got together. They were small. Now these have become professional organizations. They've grown. They get large grants, thanks to foundations and sometimes corporates. In India, there's a CSR requirement for them to be funded. And so they've grown. And these have become now people which are large. Some of them have, hundreds of people working for them. Not as big maybe as in Bangladesh, but this is certainly a trend where you're seeing more and more of these development organizations, if you like to call them that, or impact organizations, which are non-commercial, non-business, but need equally to be managed and need to make sure that they're efficient, their costs are under control, their people are well managed, that they deliver effectively, that they deal with their, call them customers, beneficiaries, call them partners with great care. The very same things that might drive some part of business, but there's no profit motive here. The bottom line is completely different. What you're maximizing is different. And therefore, how you deal with things is very different. And this, in some ways, has spilled into the business world, the concept of a changing business compact of what is the objective of business. And that is changing. I don't want to address that just at this point of time. But I know, Prasad, we are tight for time. So I just want to stop with these few key elements and touch on what they might imply. And I'll stop at that point of what it may do for an MBA. First is because of gigging and the expertise level, organizations have necessarily to be flatter. Because you have different experts with different expertise, some of them really great experts, you might pay them a great deal, as much as the CEO maybe, and they report to you full-time, part-time, so it's a very different kind of organization. Second, the concept of a pyramid has to be broken and go away. I think purely if you think of it in terms of topography, you might think more as a circle with the CEO at the center, pulling in people and so on, and everything else is level. So a flatter organization, not just in terms of flattening the pyramid, but the very topography of it might change in terms of how we look at this. A third is motivations in terms of deferring things. No longer a career. No longer can you say, after 5 years, if you do very well, you move up the ladder. People are looking for shorter term impact. And therefore, some of it is money and compensation, in fact, a large part. But a great deal also has to be what is the learning? What is the satisfaction level? What is the motivation? How do I get along with my colleagues? So it's that kind of thing. And finally, the external environment where there's a change, and particularly, again, this is at least in India, a big impact of the epidemic. I hope it sustains. I hope it grows. It may be short term, but I'm hoping it's not, is a greater feeling of, you might say, compassion, for lack of any other good word for it. And businesses have got to exhibit that not only are they conscious of the traditional broader vision, you might say 3 Ps, and so, environment in a general sense of the the physical environment, today also the social environment, and therefore the degree of compassion. And these are going to influence the MBA. I'll stop there and not talk about what it means for an MBA school, but I do think it calls for much change. Thank you.
Very good, Kiran. In fact, what I took away from this is that the change that we're seeing today is not just restricted to the business environment, but really coming down to a societal level and a cultural level, and that's making it much more of a significant thing for us to be addressing right now. And I'd like to take this thing forward to think about, how does it, being a consultant, of course, I see various kinds of industries, but, we have Arun Mayra, who's really had this overview of a lot of things in terms of, the industries that it affects, the kinds of changes that we're expecting. And so I'd like to call on you, Arun, to see what you think of the drivers of this change.
Well, let me start with the first question that you asked us as you opened this conversation. And your question was, why are we raising these questions now? And I want to say, please change the question. Make it, why are we raising these questions again? Because I want to remind, well, not remind, but maybe share with all of you and remind those who remember it, that in 2006, the UN Global Compact, which, as you know, is a body run by the private sector, the only UN body run by the private sector, which was set up to ensure that the private sector played its role in the Millennium Development Goals, which were put in 2000. And it wasn't apparently, the private sector itself, the people on the board and was on the board, weren't satisfied with their ability to produce the results that society wanted. Okay, and they felt that maybe the people they're getting, the leaders they're getting inside their organizations and managers are not equipped for that. So then the blame is passed on to the management schools, that maybe the management schools are not giving us the sort of people we need so that we can play our role in a society. So a big meeting was set up between the UN Global Compact and PRIME, that is the Principles of Responsible Management Education, the global organization, which has the deans of all the leading business schools of the world, some 500 of them. And this was a huge meeting set up in the Case Western University in Cleveland and run using the appreciative inquiry process by David Cooper-Ryder, who the dean of the school there, who had, as you invented and propagated that process. So we went on to the deep question then that business is not contributing to society. It seems to be serving, as we've said already, the shareholders and its own owners. Maybe it's producing good products, and it needs to produce good products to get income from citizens to serve its shareholders, but the ultimate purpose remains produce results for the shareholders. So we went into that discussion then, and it concluded with, I would share this with you, that the top, I forget, 25, 30 business leaders, and they're the big majigs of the corporate world, and the top 25 deans of the big majigs of the business schools got together in a closed session and said, look, let's be honest here. Let's not perform for the gallery, because we've got, people asking us tough questions, and many students were there from the business schools around the world. In this, there were 2,000-3,000 people in the room, of 1,000 and another couple of thousand on online conversations across the world, same simultaneously. And here's what it came down to, that business and business schools are interlocked in a system. And the business schools said to the businesses that, it's a good business principle to give your customers what they want. If you keep asking us for certain types of people with certain skills and talents, we'll of course keep giving them to you, right? So don't blame us. You change what you want. And then we will, well, with a lag perhaps, deliver you what you want. So now they're passing the buck back. It started with the businesses saying the business schools are at fault, business schools saying you are at fault. So they're both interlocked into a system, and they have to change together. They have to change together. Now, I would also say, look, this was then, 2005-06. And so we're asking the question again in a smaller format. It was asked in a very huge format, but there was no change nevertheless, because we have to ask the question again. So the question is, why is it that the system doesn't change? Why is it that business doesn't change? And therefore, why is it that business schools don't change, in spite of the world pressing them to make change? And Klaus Schwab, every year since 2000, every year, and this is now 2020, has put out at the opening statement that the world doesn't trust business, guys. The world is changing. Please change yourselves. He starts with that. And just look what's happened through Davos throughout. It's a great celebration about, we know the answers to the world. We know how to run big, complicated businesses. Some of them are larger than countries. So why can't presidents and prime ministers behave like us and learn leadership skills from us? We know how to get things done. So there is a deeper need to question here about why is it that businesses get away with, I'm saying businesses first before business schools, get away with being put on the pedestal all the time and not changing themselves fast enough. Because if they don't change themselves fast enough, business schools are not going to change fast enough. Now, coming back to the business schools, because we are talking about business schools, can business schools do something suo motu? Because they do care. There should be a responsible institution like educational institutions, which I would say, frankly, they are not. They're a vocational training institution. They produce people who have the skills to fit into someone's requirements immediately, hit the deck running, as it were. And they get paid a lot for it. So let's use strong words. I think business schools are producing mercenaries. They earn a lot of money to get things done efficiently. They don't care about the purpose for which their skills are being used. Whether the company is producing tobacco products or damaging the environment, it doesn't matter. I'm going to be a good manager. I'm not part of it. And those companies pay very well too. And business schools rank themselves by the salaries that their students get. The Financial Times does the rankings. So the business schools are into the same paradigm. We produce people who earn a lot of money. The businesses also are producing a lot of money for their shareholders. So that's the whole economy. And it's not going to change unless some very fundamental things, which already have been mentioned by Sanjay to start with. What is the purpose of the business? And I therefore comes to what is the purpose of the business school. I want to get off the purpose of the business for a moment, because the subject is the business school. And if the business school's purpose is only to serve what its customer needs, which is primarily business, then that's okay. But let's not talk about them as being an agent of change or an educational institution helping young people to develop good ethical values. The business schools, that's not their dhanda, that is not their objective, and will not be unless they say whether my people who pass out of this school get more money or not. I am responsible for producing good leaders who care about the conditions of society, learn the skills to be able to produce change in society and not just wealth for shareholders. Kiran, you rightly mentioned that there is a change coming in that there are many organizations, and some are CSR business type organizations and some more genuine development organizations who are growing, and thank goodness they are, and they need people. Now, I've had a 3 or 4 year experience here with India. We set up an Indian School of Development Management precisely to address that need. What sort of skills, what sort of orientations of mind, what sort of ethical values do people need who are learning management, but learning it in the context to help the world become a better world? And they, this last year, had a struggle because the people they are producing, remarkable people, young people, cannot get the salaries that they would get if they were to be employed by Levers or someone else. And so the board of the school and the funders of the school has done an evaluation saying our school is not good enough. We are not able to place our students at high salaries. And when our ranking, when we are compared as a management school with others, we are doing very poorly. And so what are they doing? They're introducing larger numbers of hours, making half their program the conventional management program to provide marketing skills and finance skills. Whereas previously there were small subjects, very small, because they believed that those type of skills and techniques the students could learn beforehand, afterwards, as they needed them. They were not unique, but what they were producing were the unique skills that the world needs today. But, I don't know, the board who's managing themselves, this is not a successful school because our people don't earn high monies and we're not ranked as high as Ahmedabad or so on. We're not even anywhere on that scale, so let's change it. Now, coming back to that conference and I'll end with there, in Case Western University, when those people, two groups, had that discussion, the senior most person from the corporate side, much revered, Anderson Carpets, the CEO, he then spoke on behalf of the business community to the business schools. And he said, well, you have to do something suo moto, stop teaching finance and marketing and teach human values, ethics, building teams with commitment and not teams that comply with your requirements or what you want them to do and then provide them, carrots with a lot of money. Stop the finance program and the marketing programs and give the space for the learning of other things. And of course, what the business schools said, but Mr. So-and-so, you are in your own organization, you don't know what's happening. The people who come with marketing from our schools get higher salaries when hired in your organization. We are producing some of the others, but they are in your organizations given lesser salaries. The people who I said are in HR or social work, enterprise work, much less. So there it is. So I'm going to leave it with that as a question that to us all, that what parts of the system must change together so that we can get more responsible business education for more responsible businesses.
Thank you, Arun. Actually, you touched upon two different things. One is, of course, I wrote an article a few years ago in Mint through Founding Fuel about why CEOs and entrepreneurs need to read more tragedy and why we need to bring in more humanities courses into business schools, because it gives us the larger picture of where the business is actually situated in society, in the doing. And I always believe that the role of business is actually to do good to the world, while of course profiting. But the real role is to do some good to the world, to make the world progress in some ways. The second thing that you touched upon is ISDM, and it was very interesting to hear about your take on the ISDM, because I'm going to be leading the capstone semester in next June for ISDM. Initially, I was going to teach a strategy course for them, but then as our conversation evolved, I'm going to be actually heading the capstone semester, the last semester before they graduate. And a lot of insights for me to take away from your comments. So that's...
May I just say, Baba, we talked about, someone said that, I think Meeta said that to listen and learn. I found that, look, I have a long experience, as you said, in management and in being a consultant and also in teaching in business schools. And I realized that I shouldn't come and teach the teachers and the students of that school. And I don't. And I'm worried about this, that people with my skills and experience are going to teach. I'm sorry, we've got to learn new things. I'm coming back, therefore. We people who succeeded in business have to learn new things before we can help to develop the new people.
Absolutely. In fact, the whole idea of growth is a big question. How do you think about growth? Entrepreneurs are taught to grow and grow like Facebooks and whatnot. And what's the idea of growth? Is it at the expense of the world? What is the, is there a kind of limiting to the world, that you're drawing in terms of resources? So all these questions do come up. And as you said, there should be in tandem, change should be in tandem, both from the business's perspective and from the business school perspective. And of course, nothing better than to think about culture. And this is where, I want to bring Arup in, because he's a design thinker, and design thinking, of course, begins with gathering the facts from the ground. So I'd like to hear, Arup, what you have to say about how your views are with regard to the drivers of change that are leading us to this discussion.
Thanks. Great to be in this fantastic company. My background is that can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I've been sort of privileged to be mentored by Shrikant Datar himself. That was my introduction in design thinking. And just to cut a long story short, and I think Indrajit IGS has been completely sort of privy to that. I have the distinct honor of adapting his Harvard Business School curriculum for design thinking for Indian colleges. He allowed me to both adapt it as well as run it for colleges. Was I successful? Absolutely not. It was a glorious sort of, I failed monumentally. Why? Which is all the reasons which all you have put through. Management, and I speak entirely from my experiences in running these workshops, and I would like to say workshops because I don't believe in the teaching thingy. I always believe that any sort of experience must be a learning one. And most of them have the attitude that it ain't broke, so don't fix it. That brings me to the thought about design thinking, which I will tackle later. But I very much, having heard all you gentlemen, the word leadership came across very, very strongly. And it is absolutely true. That's where our, what can I say, a lacuna lies. And I would make a provocative statement, which I swear by. There's an author called Max McEwan, who has written a lovely little book called The Truth About Innovation. He says, it's criminal to waste a crisis. We have a crisis now. And I see a lot of people sort of falling over the edge. And it's because what we need is leadership, as has been brought out by you. We need a bit of resilience. We need adaptability. All these points have been made by you. But then what is this sort of leadership? And I'll be a little academic here, and I'll leave it to you, very experienced gentlemen, to sort of interpret it accordingly. I would say that it's called, and my favorite word is called uncommon leadership. And uncommon leadership is making sense before it becomes common sense. Very easy to say. But Shrikant Datar, in his book, Rethinking the MBA, has done a very, very deep study, and he says we are all very good with knowing the knowledge part. Colleges, some of them, and he's talking from the college point of view, all right in doing, but the last part, the being, is absolutely missing. And this has all been brought out by you people in various ways, in terms of awareness, in terms of empathy, and I would put it in a simple word, it's doing the right thing. It's very difficult to explain that, but it brings in a lot of concepts. And I would again fall back on my academic background and quote somebody called Dr. Martin Newman, who's the author of Emotional Capitalists. He says that to be a successful leader, you need to exhibit a sense of mindfulness. And I will just read it out because I think it's important I get it right. It's a skill of paying close attention to what's happening in the present moment, in the mind, body, and external environment, non-judgmentally, and with an attitude of curiosity and openness. This is missing. I'd like to stop here because, I can go on. I'm very passionate about that. And in terms of what is required in this sort of leader, is the difference between you having a company which is surviving to a company which is flourishing. What do you need? All these points have been brought out by you gentlemen using, things like having a trust, things like we need to be non-business in our approach. We need to consider society. We need to have a new business relationship. We need to have responsible behavior. What does it mean? It basically means a sense of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness. See, at the end of the day, I believe that innovation, to me as a definition, is one that brings in social change. So if you have an offering as a company, if you wish to prosper, your offering must bring in social change. And in bringing in social change, you must exhibit that mindfulness. Otherwise, you will not spot what is the unmet need. I'll just stop here because, I will probably become a bit too academic and lose track of reality. But I truly believe that this is a great time to test out these concepts. And in my limited sort of experience with businesses, very fixed mindset, They are all in the exploitation stage, meaning how can I do it meaner, leaner, agile, whatever it is. They have lost track of the bigger world outside and definitely hit the delete or the eject button on society. I'll stop here for comments, questions, answers. And it's important to me because I'm actually authoring a book on design thinking. I put all this in. I'll be happy to share it with anybody who wants to know. Unedited, a few parts have been written. But thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So let's, I'd like to throw the floor open a bit and see if you have any responses to what we have said so far, or if you have some new thoughts that have emerged as we did our conversation. So whoever wants to speak can just unmute and speak, please, and then we will go around.
I'd just like to make a quick comment because he captured it very well. You know, Peter Drucker once said, there are two things that you tackle in business: doing the right things, as he said, and doing things right.
Yes.
So that's called efficiency. The other one is called effectiveness.
Yes.
And he wrote a book called The Effective Executive. And so Arup is clearly referring to that idea, the idea that effectiveness is as integral a part of being a top flight manager as efficiency. But one of the things that the business education, in fact, emphasizes to a huge degree is focusing on the efficiency paradigm.
Absolutely.
And that's a big, the second thing which I think is very important, I don't know how, I'm not clear how you teach it. There are many things which are, people have written about, going way back to Montaigne or more recently Charles Handy. So you can, pick and choose what you relate to. But I think at the end of the day, it's how do you instill character in people who are part of a class, who are being, prepared for, as I think Dr. Myra put it, for a vocation. So you can still possess and be defined by character. And I think that's really what's lacking around the world. I mean, the most visible one to me in recent times has been Mark Zuckerberg in Facebook.
Yes.
That is a lack of character. He may be incredibly smart at problem solving. He may be incredibly profitable. He may have some wonderful ideas about technology. But to me, he lacks character. In the midst and the role that he plays today in society, that Facebook plays and fulfills, is a huge role. And for the leader of that kind of organization to have the kind of mindset that he does is what I think best defines how tragic the situation is in terms of leadership.
Exactly. Now, in fact, that's many of my students, when I teach in MBA courses in India, the ideal is people like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and people who grow. And I feel grow at the expense of society, not for the benefit of society. So I think the theme that's coming out here is that companies have to become much more social minded and be as consumers of the MBA programs, and in turn force the MBA programs to kind of adapt to their needs. Is that right?
Prasad, if I can step in here, and I think Sanjoy and you mentioned technologists, and I did want to make this point separately when we thought we talk of the MBA schools and what they need to do.
Hello.
First we get a lot of technologists coming into them. In fact, in the IIMs, a preponderant majority has been engineers. They're trying to correct that, but even now it's upwards of 2/3 in almost all the business schools, the top business schools in India, and they come with a technological background. Their heroes are the great technological successes, that is those who made it big. And therefore, what tends to happen is the focus very strongly on efficiency. They have a disconnect with society and with what you talked of earlier, the changing technological paradigm within the organizations, the digitization that's happening, the automation that's happening, robotics that's been coming in. more and more people are dealing with machines rather than human beings. And this is changing their perspective. This is very worrisome. And if the business schools also disconnect them from real social concerns, human concerns, and you put it very well when you said, maybe they should study tragedy. I think they need to study classics of all kinds and good literature. But that may be one way to connect. I have no answer. I'm not an academic. And, I do feel, though, that the lack of any rooting in the whole social sphere is a big concern. You get people who come with, thorough engineering background. They're used to taking a problem and solving it as quickly and efficiently as possible. They're not concerned with the impact of the solution or even with defining the problem necessarily. And they move on in terms of how do I just take these resources and produce the best and most efficient output, which is very different from looking at social impact or effectiveness, even within a business organization, even within non-business organizations. And as we get more technology into organizations, again, I'm not talking about business. Every organization today is getting more and more automated for one reason or other, sometimes for good reason, sometimes for not so good reasons. There is concern that the human connects are going to decrease. And as somebody told me the other day, half jokingly, that the next courses in HR or in, managing human resources is no longer is going to transform not to managing human resources, but to managing machines. That's a bit too much, but I think it gives you the story of where we might be headed and what we might need to do by way of correctives in the MBA curriculum so as to turn out people who are more rounded than just being effective managers who work efficiently.
Correct. Very good. Arun, you have something to add?
Yes, please. You mentioned about Mark Zuckerberg, and it's about role models.
Yes.
And one way to change the direction of development of a young person, the aspirations of a young person, is to offer the right sort of role models, the sort of role models that embody the qualities that we would like more of in people, in young people as they grow to be leaders. And I'm sorry that all of us are responsible for putting on pedestals those who are successful in the present paradigm. It always has to be so. That those who are successful in the present paradigm are put up as role models, and then the others want to be more like them. If we want to start to get people to direct themselves towards other role models, then yes, let's start putting those other role models up. Now, there would be a challenge here that some of the other role models may be, like Kiran said, purely from the development world. I could put Ela Ben Bhatt as a role model. I mean, she runs businesses. Frankly, that's what she does, has done and built businesses of women earning for themselves, producing wealth for themselves, being good business managers. But if I put Ela Ben Bhatt up in a business school, as this is the person that you should want to be like, well, how much does she earn? And look how she dresses. Yeah. And in which magazine is she written about? And when awards are given by the business journals for the best business of the year, the best enterprise of the year, just look at them in the last few weeks. Who gets the awards? So yes, change will have to come with many organs of society saying, we want to create a new paradigm. And even the media, and it will come harder first to the business media that is supported by the advertisements and the events of these people. So you see, everyone is going to be saying, look, if they do, I want something different, and I'm going to be making choices here. I will stop appearing less successful in the present world, but I, in my heart, I'm going to feel myself as doing the right thing and helping to create a new world. It comes to all of us. Yes. And let's not blame the students too much. And I would say even the business school deans, I'm saying, of course, since the subject is that, they should be leaders since they are about education. But many people around, the media, the people who give awards, the people who design events, and this is something Indrajit and I talk about a lot, to say, yes, I know you got to put someone on the platform there. And they will say how good their company is and tell us some CSR stories and so on. It's hardly enough. To your question about in the beginning, why are we asking the same question again? There surely have been many good stories of many good companies for the last 15 years. We've heard them again and again. They even haven't changed enough. And B, not many other companies have joined in that change. So let's all start to showcase different things, not successful businesses in the present paradigm, and not people who just are doing CSR on the side or some philanthropy on the side, which they then greenwash themselves with, and to say as if that's their whole business. It is not.
Exactly. Arup, you're on audio now, right? Respond to all these comments that we've made so far.
See, I think the whole thing is that I was just chatting it down that we need to change the parameters for success in business.
Yeah.
Okay, and how, when, why, what? It's very qualitative, but I'm very sure because my response as an academic, and I've seen a bit of both business side as well, that if today's day is of an experience economy, it's very competitive, and just I am very good at what I do belief does not work. Today, if I have a good experience about anything, I will repurchase, rebuy, or whatever it's called. So to prove a better experience, the customer, the company has to be more empathetic towards the user or the buyer or whatever it is. And therefore, I feel that at the end of the day, again, coming back ad nauseum to my point, which says, how do you define that I have a good offering? A good offering is something which will change the way I live. In a small way, maybe. Not in a significant way. I'm not talking about earth-shattering this thing like the discovery of an internet or discovery of fuel or something like that. But in small ways, whatever we buy today, we buy because it's changing the way we do something or the other. That, I think, will determine the success of a business. And to do that on the business side, you need an empathetic leader. And an empathetic leader is somebody who is willing to do the right thing. The right thing means it's risky. To be risky means he has to be comfortable with the unknown. And to be comfortable with the unknown, he has to very simply, what can I say? He should be able to do extraordinary things with ordinary people. And to me, and having been in a lot of organizations before, what we lack organizationally is, if you ask me that, how can you today, it comes to that one point which I've yet, I'm happy to see if something happens like that. How can you build a trusting organization? In today's sort of crisis, there will be failures. How can you have a trusting organization where failure is treated as an experience and not as something which is at a stigma? Does that to an extent sort of answer all the concepts? There are a lot of concepts in the air. Nothing is proven yet, and it's very difficult because today you can't quantitatively actually find who's a good leader or bad leader today if you want to do it this way on these things. Because I would again default back to Dr. Newman, where he puts down things like self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, empathy, adaptability. These are things will test of leadership. Yeah.
Actually, all the stuff that we have so far been calling soft skills are actually the more essential skills in some sense.
It is today.
Yeah. So, Arup, that's a good segue for us to take this to the next question, which is the broad framing question that I had in mind, which is what is the role or how should we restructure an Indian MBA in particular? Is there specific challenges that we see in India that come into the picture, or are there certain societal demands that we see in India that will require us to actually restructure this, taking this need of the business where the MBAs will ultimately work? So how do we marry these two? So I'd like to, I know Kiran will have to run off at some time. So I'd like to start the second question with Kiran and then take that on to the other speakers.
I also have to run off at the same time. So after Kiran, if you don't mind, after Kiran. Thank you.
After Kiran.
Okay. Thank you, Prasad. I'll be brief because, as I said earlier, I'm not an academic, and I think this is really for academics to look at the inputs that came from our first discussion and see what is worthwhile in terms of the changing environment, the changing needs, and therefore how do they react to them. But just two comments on that. One, certainly the point you made earlier and I mentioned earlier, a change away from what Arun put very well as vocational training, a change to a broader vision of what things are like. So it's not a training school. It's truly a school which educates people with a capital E. I think that has to be a relook at the courses to get away from the purely functional. Skills today are much easier. They can be learned online. In fact, there are many skills which you don't even have to learn because they already made things available. In my day, we learned a great deal about how to, do a regression and so on. Today, just go to a computer and that's it. It's like using a slide rule. If some of you remember a thing called a slide rule, those days are gone. So therefore, I think skill teaching has, first of all, not much relevance. Second, a very limited value and shelf life. It changes. And therefore, the schools need to focus more on aspects which are broader, which will continue learning how to learn. The second comment I have is, when in ancient times, I won't mention how long ago, I graduated from IMA as Sanjoy did much later. We were told, and this is what seeped into us, it became part of our DNA, that we were change agents. So we were not cogs in the wheel fitting into a given organization to a given task, but we were change agents. How successful we were, how many imbibed it, how many did it is different. But this was the concept which the business school gave us. Today, when I talk to many of the young people in the schools, as I said, I don't go there as frequently, but I had a chance through many associations with some of the business schools to be talking to the younger people there, the graduates. I don't see that. They think their job is to be, as I said earlier, efficient managers who deliver the best for their shareholders. And they're limited to that. And therefore, as Arun said earlier, their idea is naturally given that orientation. The idea is who are the people who have created the maximum wealth, maybe for themselves, maybe for their company, the valuations. And that's the game. So even young entrepreneurs who want to start up something new because it excites them, many of them I find are focused not on creating an enterprise of sustainability, of creating an enterprise that continues, but only on creating an enterprise which they can quickly sell to somebody else for a high valuation. To me, a large part of this is what you rightly said, so-called soft skills of what you are able to transmit to people. And today, the requirement is for leadership, for partnering, compete, yes, maybe, but partner with people. And again, that's lost. Yes, a lot of the work in the business schools is done in teams, but the basic underlying concept is tremendously competitive. It's a rat race within the business schools, at least in India, which you don't even see in the corporates. It's a tremendous rat race there. And I think that's very, very self-defeating. They go out into companies and pretty much carry that same culture. The concept of dialogue, of partnership, of working together is very limited, very transactional, very functional. So I think something there in terms of a course change. And the third and the last one I want to mention is something we all mentioned in different ways, is somehow creating a greater awareness about society and societal needs. Again, even for a business enterprise, from a selfish point of view. And the understanding that if you don't do that, your enterprise will either be short-lived or maybe shortchanged by customers who have become more aware. And I think this has to be a game there. So just those few comments, Prasad. As I said, I leave it to others who spend more time in academia to see what this means. Thank you.
Brilliant points. Arun,
Yes, please. Thank you so much. Firstly, going back to what Kiran just said about the narrowness of the education that's provided in the MBA schools to make people be very proficient in the use of certain tools with which they can then in turn go produce results efficiently. Jeffrey Pfeiffer, he wrote this book in the early 2000s. Shrikant Datar was on the East Coast and Jeffrey on the West Coast in Stanford about education. And he pointed out through research and analysis that the only school of higher education that produces people who are narrower when they come out of it than when they entered is business schools. You strip them of many things and make them focus on just a few things that they can use as very efficient tools to produce more efficiency in businesses. So yes, firstly, let's broaden the soft things that we have stripped out. They must become the central things, because that's a real change in the development of a person who can help develop a better society. The second thing is, I wanted to put up another book here, if you don't mind my putting it up here. This is a book called Good Work, When Excellence and Ethics Meet, by three great educators, Howard Gardner of Harvard,
I know.
Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he wrote the book about flow. The work that you do, you
That's how
must
you
flow
pronounce
with it. Your life flows and you become feeling that you are part of something larger when you're engaged with work that matters. And William Damon, also a social psychologist. And this book, they're talking about professionals generally, doctors, okay, journalists. These are professions. And he said all these professions are getting corrupted by money. That it comes, a judgment is, I will earn a lot of money and therefore I choose this profession. And then you lose your ethics really and forget what the purpose of a profession is, to serve others, to learn a skill to serve others with. And in business, this is the worst of all. You don't even start. You say, I want to do this good in society. That is why, for example, a doctor may be, I want to help heal people, or a journalist, I want to help to uncover truth for the sake of, producing a better society. Business people or students joining business school join to earn money, to join a big company, have a career and to earn money. So they would have to be, I think, trained to begin with. Young person, there's a long life before you, you're going to help to change the world. So what is the purpose of your existence? Why were you born? Why are you here? Whose life is going to be improved by you and by what you learn here? Your measure of success cannot be and should not be how much more money you got compared to someone else, which is exactly what they judge themselves by. Who got the better placement? Therefore, who's the better person? And you emulate that and goes further and further. So purpose, constantly reminding at the time they join and throughout, referring back to the purpose. And then pick up the tools, of course. And you must be the most proficient at the tools, but use them for an ethical purpose. And self-serving is never ethical. The other is standards. Yes, you have to maintain good standards, and professional schools must help to lift the standards. But who's going to be the judge of the standards? Certainly the best professionals can be the best judges of the best standards. That's why it used to be that accounting firms used to manage their own standards and not the government. But of course, that has also got corrupted again. More money, right? So there must be amongst business people the willingness to test each other. Are we holding ourselves to the higher standards? And this, I'm afraid, the whole business community and the business associations, that's not what they judge by. They may claim that we are the businesses that are the best for the world. But if any one of their members, and many of their members, do not follow those standards, what do they do about it? In fact, they'll have them on the stage next time because they'll give some more money for the next event. Exactly. Hold yourself up to a higher standard. The business must hold itself up to a higher standard, and the business school also. And thereby, the young people will learn to hold themselves up to the higher standard. We need people holding themselves up to even higher standards than we have in our generation.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, sometimes the role of the certifying boards is a big question, because they demand that you teach those efficiencies that we're talking about. And as a result, if you don't teach those efficiencies in the given time frame, you might not get the certification. So business schools are actually struggling to meet that demand. So the role of the certifying boards also something that we should examine. So Sanjoy, you have something to add?
Prasad, may I, if you allow, and if you were saying calling on Sanjoy, if he doesn't mind, can I just make a 1-minute comment in addition, which I put down as being critical?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Just want to say, what can you do in 2 years of an MBA education, given that the background the person has is 20 odd years of living in a different way and 16 years of formal education? To what extent can you change the person? And I looked at this, and the concern I had is the filter that's used for admissions, particularly in the more well-known business schools. And this filter, to me, and let me signify it in a very brief way by what I wrote about many, many years ago. I called it first the Kalam effect and the Mother Teresa syndrome. And let me take a minute to explain that. The Kalam effect was, when I talked to a number of toppers from the IITs and the IIMs, particularly in the IIMs, I found that when I asked them this question, that who is your role model, something that Arun mentioned, and the reaction of about 80% of those people at that time, and this was some years ago, was President Kalam. I asked them for an Indian role model. I said President Kalam. My first reaction was, wow, how wonderful. Here's a person who's done great things for the country, who's not just made money, who's come from a different kind of background and who's been so successful. But the more I thought about it, the more it worried me that more than 80% of these people didn't think of anybody else, not a cricketer, not a chef, not a film star, not a poet, not a writer, President Kalam. And then I remembered something else, and some of you would recall this. In the late 90s, a whole series of young and very, very good-looking and intelligent Indian women won the Miss Universe, Miss World awards. And some people say this was put on to get, the cosmetic guys into India. That's a different story. But I called it the Mother Teresa syndrome. And the reason was that the final question when they had the finals they were asked was, who is your role model? And, irrespective of the question, if it was not that, doesn't matter what they asked, whom would you like to be like? Who do you think has done great work? Whatever the question, the answer was Mother Teresa. And that won them the prize. So what I figured out was that either this is a very desirable answer to say Mother Teresa or President Kalam, or worse, the filter that is used for selecting the people who come in is such that it gets clones of each other. Yes, they may seem to come from diverse backgrounds in terms of where they come and the kind of education, but their thinking is either molded to be the same or is in fact the same. And this lack of diversity, I think, is a killer, because then you get this thing of having singular role models, of not going into diverse things. And I see that change happening from the days when I was in business school and a few years later. Not that those were great days, but proportionately a lot more people from our batches went into academics, went into social service, went into different things. Now, it's only a very, very small minority that does anything else. A few of them go into entrepreneurship, looking at what happens there, as I mentioned earlier, and very few get into other fields. Some do, but very few proportionately. So I think it's a question of the input, and therefore, in 2 years, how can you shape them? Maybe not. So let's look at the input first and see what you can do with them. Thank you. I'm sorry for intervening. Apologies, Sanjay.
Very illustrative. Sanjay?
Baba, I'm going to also switch off in 2 minutes. Huh?
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Right, what Dr. Karnik said, I think there's huge relevance to that, because if you have, people who are great at problem solving, IIM entrance exam, and if you look at all the ways in which, the way the interview goes and so on, they're really traits, and those traits are not consistent with the kinds of answers we're looking for. So the input problem is a huge problem, but there's another very large problem. Today, business is measured by markets. It's your market capitalization that defines how successful you are as a business. And because we are wedded to this model of economic resource allocation, which we believe is the most efficient, is that everything in the end gets determined by markets. I think a lot of that comes back and affects how people behave, because given the incentives you have, or the reward system you have, and the punishment system you have, your behavior is going to be shaped by that. And if, market capitalization at the end of the day is what defines who you are and what really matters, then clearly, you're going to behave in that fashion. And so no amount of saying that we want to bring about change is possible unless, we look at how, in the end, companies define their own success.
Yeah. See, but also the ultimate thing, right, Sanjay, that the people who are graduating do go into the businesses. So what happens is that perhaps if we have imbued enough or infused enough spirit into these MBAs that are going into businesses, perhaps in the organizations, there will be from the ground up a kind of rising of this awareness. While it might not come top down, it now starts to build from the recent MBA grad who enters the corporation to start kind of moving the company, as we said earlier, as being the focus of change, so the change agent. So maybe we can think that way too, and see that the role of the MBA program, the MBA institution, as we said, is not just about professional, vocational stuff, but also taking it to being more part of what we would call a university education.
Can I just give you 2 minutes and I'm going to go?
Sure.
Just your point. I just want to emphasize your point and relating it to what you said about India. Yeah. I think if we were to create an Indian measurement system of evaluating management schools, which would judge them by the things that we believe a good management school in India, maybe it's the whole world, should be doing. Now, that award will not get much respect to begin with because our Indian business schools, like all Indian businesses, like all Indians, want to be compared on some international scale. But this is where the leaders come, because this Indian award will begin to give the people who compete on it some platform to compare with each other and learn from each other. And over time, maybe the world will begin to respect this model of education, which this award has triggered. Okay, so this is something that could be done. And even the businesses like Levers, Nitin will be on the panel, if they could support an Indian award, and they, of course, they're going to have to judge themselves and be true. If the schools who are getting the Indian award and not the schools from whom they hire, people are going to say, look, don't greenwash. This has another CSR venture. Use this to improve what you said, the point that they made, that we're not getting the sort of people we want. If really you want people who are different to the ones who produce shareholder value, then please support the nurturing of the system. And it's not difficult for you because you have the platform and you can, sanctify the award and all that. So this is my last story. Let's create an Indian award with Indian standards of what we believe a good management education should be.
Fantastic idea. It's a fantastic idea. Yeah. And in fact, I would say, take it even farther to thinking about a different kind of a certification board, where you're talking not just about the regular kind of MBA, but an Indian kind of MBA with ideas of social good and, as you said, good work. What is their sense of good work? Arup, you want to say something just to close this?
No, not really. I think I've shot all the arrows in my. It's really been very, very, very humbling to be in the company of all of you. So thank you for having me on this. It's great learning for me as well. There are a lot of thoughts which I can now translate into. As I said, I was writing a book, but thank you for that. As I said, I've become more of an academic, and I like to be in my own safe corner. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was such an educative experience for me to never stop learning. So it was great to learn from all of you. Thank you. Indrajit, over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Prasad. Thank you, Mr. Karnik, Sanjoy. Mr. Myra's left us, but we heard him too, and Arup. It's been a great experience for us tuning into this conversation, because I think what emerged for me, and I'm sure my colleagues at Founding Fuel will echo this, is that the Indian construct of what management education ought to be, there are specific challenges. Structurally, as a country, we're different from perhaps that of the US, but there are certain core issues that are common to management education around the world, and India has some unique challenges. COVID has clearly exposed a lot of the fault lines in our society, and unless higher education and management education specifically tunes into those challenges as they kind of surface, and we've seen a lot of that, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the way our cities are planned, you name it, creating entrepreneurs who are kind of job creators rather than job takers. There are a number of issues that we've got to think about. And I think this conversation has, provided plenty of food for thought. And I'm sure on the 30th, we'd like to invite you back, all of you, to really be part of that conversation that Meeta is anchoring with Srikant Datar, with Ajit Rangnekar, Pramath and Nitin as well. And they're very, very keen to hear what these conversations were about. They repeatedly told us that please share the recordings, which we'll do immediately today, so that they have it with them with a transcript, because it'll, I think, take the conversation to a higher level, because you've done a lot of the distillation. And I'm sure, Baba Prasad, when you come back as chair in that plenary session, you'll be able to also offer them a distilled view and the audience, because the response to this masterclass on the future of the MBA has drawn a huge response. We're really gratified by the kind of people who've signed up. There's a huge amount of interest. So I'm hoping that this will be And we also kind of keep you posted about what happens in the second breakout tomorrow, which Professor Rishikesha Krishna is chairing as well. So we're going to continue this conversation on Slack as well, on our Slack channel, because we believe that it's better to try and kind of process this and frame the issues in the way that you've done, Prasad, today with this panel. And we need to do the audience as well. So we're keeping that channel open for the conversation. So thank you. And I'd like, Meeta, if you have any concluding comments to make, and then we'll close for this evening.
I just wanted to thank everybody for firstly such an idealistic conversation, and also, while being idealistic, also recognizing the fact that we have a loss of truth and we have a loss of trust at every level, and we haven't been able to give our MBA students the ability to proceed with truth and trust in their own will to be change makers, as you said. I'm from the same institute. I inherited the same ethos that your job is to go out there and be the change maker. Your job is to make it better. My personal motto has been make it better. I mean, just as simple as that. And I think the kind of optimism and confidence that we were given in the early years has definitely been lost. And it is up to us to renew the faith. Of course, in the main plenary session, I'm not going to sound as philosophical as this, or you will appreciate the challenge. But I think this conversation has given us a lot to reflect upon, and then how to present it in more practicable terms. Because unfortunately or fortunately, we live in a utilitarian world right now, and will be in a utilitarian world for at least another 3 to 4 years till we make the change happen. So it's on us now to get this done. So thank you very much, IG, for starting such a fantastic conversation at such a wonderful time, where we can feel that need for change. Sometimes it's about timing as well.
That's true. That's true. So it's all about timing in this one, because I think it's forced us to and given us an opportunity to reimagine what MBA education can be, and it needn't necessarily be a 1 year, 2 year program. It is really about creating an MBA for life, as it were. So on that note, thank you so much, all of you. Really appreciate, and I'd like you to just remember to block your calendar for the 30th evening.